Good morning.
We are going to go ahead and get started. My name is Sarah Brewerton-Palmer. I'm the former president and the current co-chair of the legislative committee for the Georgia First Amendment Foundation. And I'm a partner at the law firm Kaplan Cobb, where I do First Amendment and media law, as well as commercial litigation. I want to thank everybody for joining us this morning to talk about the Gold Dome 2026. And thanks to the Atlanta Press Club for doing this joint event each year. It's always a great one for our slate of events for the year to kick things off. We're joined by a great panel today for our first session. And just a reminder, we're going until 8:45, and then I will toss things over to the Atlanta Press Club panel. Buzz Brockway is our first panelist. He is the Georgia Center for Opportunity's Vice President of Public Policy. For 8 years, Buzz served in the Georgia House of Representatives, including on committees like Appropriations, Education, Insurance, and Governmental Affairs. During his time in the legislature, he worked on legislation to fight human trafficking, reform election law, protect student data privacy, and provide additional funding for charter schools. Kathleen Hamill is an attorney with expertise in the rule of law, particularly in the context of elections and human rights. She's currently authoring a report about recent attacks on lawyers and law firms, focusing on lessons learned and recommendations for the future. And Lisa Cupid, our last panelist, is the chairwoman of the Cobb County Board of Commissioners. She has served on the Cobb board since 2013, and in 2020 was elected as Cobb's first Black and first female chair. Chairwoman Cupid has also served on the board of the Georgia First Amendment Foundation for many years. So we're going to jump into some topics heating up the legislature today that cover a range of traditional First Amendment speech issues, data privacy, which is, a little bit further afield from our mission, but is becoming increasingly important these days. Elections, which is fundamental to all of our other rights, and a couple of other things. To start off with, I'm going to talk about SB 398, which is one that the Georgia First Amendment Foundation has been following because of its implications for speech. This is a virtual peeping bill. It creates a new crime called virtual peeping that criminalizes the use of AI to make images of other people without express prior consent. Some aspects of this bill are specific to AI-generated obscenity, depicting minors, which is historically an area where governments are more able to regulate expressive conduct. But other portions of the bill would penalize anyone who makes an AI image of another person without asking first. In the view of the foundation, this goes too far. It sweeps in a lot of expressive speech that's protected by the First Amendment. That could be core political speech, like satire of elected officials. It could also be regular stuff that people do online every day, like taking a photo of a friend and giving them bunny ears with an AI engine, stuff that your mom might do. So GFAF will be reaching out to lawmakers this week to explain sort of the obvious First Amendment problems with that proposal. But I wanted to talk more broadly about AI generally and how government should be thinking about AI and preparing for it, whether proposals like this make sense, and should they be legislating it now, taking a wait and see approach. I want to gauge our panel's interest in that. Chairwoman Cupid, let's start with you from the local government perspective. If you have any perspective on this bill, we'd be certainly interested in hearing it. And what impacts are you seeing from the use of AI on public debate, public safety, and the interaction of people with their government, like open records requests and public testimony at hearings? Any of those topics that you might have noticed in your recent experience on the board?
Thank you, and good morning, Sarah, and all who have joined, and fellow panelists. AI is a topic where we are all learning as we go, and we see the positive impact of it, but we also have some very real concerns, particularly when it comes to protecting privacy, not only of our citizens, but also any confidential information that we have here in county government. We know that our citizens are utilizing AI. We also know our employees are bringing it to the workplace. And in fact, we have tools that help our agencies operate, particularly in the area of public safety, with the use of AI. And so what our IS director has done is just brought together different stakeholders across the organization to, one, first acknowledge that it is present, but to put some guardrails around it, being mindful as we're utilizing it, what type of information we're putting out in that space, to be mindful of how it's being shared, while also encouraging, employees to consider it and how it can make our operations more efficient, how it can help us be more responsive. We certainly see that in the area of customer service. We've been able to expand our 311 system for citizens to call and get help. And our capability has been augmented through various AI tools. So we recognize the utility of it, still know that there's some caution that we want to have around it, and are looking to our policymakers at the state level to help with guardrails. We know that there have been a number of committees that have been out there. So I can't speak to any particular one bill, just to let you know that we are monitoring it, seeking it for guidance, but not waiting on it, making sure that we have some practices in place already internally.
Buzz or Kathleen, do you want to jump in on any of these topics? Data privacy or AI regulation?
I'll jump in. I think, kind of your broader question of, how should the government be thinking about this? I think there are, as Commissioner Cupid said, there are many, many benefits, very practical benefits for business and government and others. But there are very, very scary dangers. I think if we look back, there's a huge debate now in society about social media and smartphones and the impact on children. We just kind of handed everybody all the way down to 13 years old, said, here you go, have an Instagram account, have a Snapchat account, and go forth. And we're seeing a lot of negative things from that. Bill just yesterday to extend the bell-to-bell ban on cell phones in schools to high school. That bill just came out of a subcommittee in the House yesterday. So I think that there's a lot of people paying attention now that maybe we should have 15, 20 years ago when social media first came on the scene. All right, what are the effects, especially on children? There are these AI companion bots that many children are saying, that's my best friend. It's not real. So what are the implications for that for these children? And of course, the education system is grappling with this. There are a lot of benefits. We're seeing teachers, for example, in lesson planning, saving a lot of time. AI makes that a whole lot easier. And so how do we go about preparing our students to take advantage of and live in an AI world where they are the masters of the AI and they don't become mastered by it? So I think government is definitely going to play a role in how that all happens. But I think, I read through the virtual peeping bill that you mentioned, Sarah. And yeah, I share some of your concerns, but somewhere in there is probably a good bill. But the debate needs to happen. It needs to be, our core fundamental rights, such as the First Amendment rights, need to be protected as we move through a debate like that.
Yeah, might be able to carve one out of the marble, a good bill out of what's there. Kathleen, do you have any perspective on this you want to share?
I just agree with the other panelists, but would also just note that obviously AI creates a lot of risks, and we all really have to be aware of that in our day-to-day lives and engaging with our representatives to make sure we're expressing what our concerns are, and not leaving that for 5, 10, 15 years or some kind of hiatus to sort of wait and see. I am not in favor of waiting and seeing, but I appreciate the focus in this conversation.
Understood. It's a bit of a genie coming out of a bottle with AI these days. Well, I'd like to turn to probably the hottest topic in Georgia right now, elections and what's been happening in the past week. There was a story in the AJC just this morning about this, the tensions amongst many different coalitions of lawmakers over this issue. Last week, the FBI raided the Fulton County Elections Office, took 3 trucks worth of documents, including voter rolls and boxes of ballots from 2020. Fulton County announced yesterday that they'll be challenging the validity of the warrant for that raid and seeking return of the documents. The state election board has suggested it's considering whether to take over Fulton County's election board through some powers that it was granted a few years ago by a new elections bill. Even before these issues in the last week, the General Assembly was already under some urgency to pass another elections bill this session because a law passed 2 years ago, which goes into effect July 1st of this year, would ban the use of QR codes and barcodes in election counting, which effectively means that our current ballot system has to be replaced for the midterms. And the General Assembly has been planning to pass a legislative fix for that problem and come up with a new system for the fall, but they have to do that this session. Kathleen, you do a lot of elections-related work. Can you give us your perspective on the General Assembly's election work they were already planning to do, and what, if anything, last week's raid is going to mean for this conversation this session?
So quick take is SB 214, which was supposed to be discussed yesterday at the House Government Affairs Committee after it was already passed actually in the last session and got some early traction during this session. SB 214 is the main focal point right now for people who are concerned about elections, thinking about elections, poll workers, a number of which showed up yesterday to basically say, hold on, this bill is not the quick fix for the QR code dilemma that we find ourselves in right now. It would be a problem at this point, I think, to implement sort of hand-marked paper ballots throughout the state on election day. That would get rid of the current processes and the BMDs that we have, the ballot marking devices, and try to use a different process, which is a big deal, right? So this was floated as part of this SB 214. Another component that seems to be a way to provide a fix for the QR code problem would be related to early voting, and that is also sort of problematic because it proposes hand counting those ballots, and as we all know, hand counting has its limitations, and if that's the go-to for addressing this, we need to think about it more carefully. So I think Victor Anderson, who's the chair of that committee, is taking a real careful look after a lot of feedback yesterday at the Golden Dome. So and of course the Fulton County raid is plays right into all of our current concerns about what's happening with elections in many ways. I would like to give credit to the fact that the Fulton County commissioners and the people who run elections in Fulton County are doing their level best to participate in this FBI investigation driven by the DOJ, and of course Tulsi Gabbard on site, we know as well. So a lot to say about all of this, but I'll just leave it there for a minute, Sarah, and see what you'd like to focus on.
Okay. Buzz, you were at the Capitol for many years, and I'm sure saw many election reform related efforts come through. What's your perspective on where things stand now and how last week's events might impact the conversation?
Well, I was at the Capitol when some Gold Dome staffers came sprinting by and said, "Did you hear that the FBI is over at the Fulton offices?" And I said, "Whoa." My first thought was, in foreign policy, they talk about an escalation ladder, and you're always careful of where you are on the escalation ladder and what the response might be. And that seems to be an FBI raid seems to be jumping several rungs up the escalation ladder in this whole debate. But I think there's just so much, a lot of confusion and disinformation swirling around, and has been since 2020, really even before that, just about how our elections work, how they're supposed to work.
Mm-hmm.
The general public just doesn't understand what the safeguards are that are built into our system that protect the secrecy of our individual ballots and the secure the data and secure the documents and all these sorts of things. Just from my own perspective, I am constantly in a minority among those who call themselves Republicans. I think hand counted paper ballots is a terrible idea. If you're concerned about people stealing votes, I'll just point out that people have been stealing votes. They know how to steal votes using hand marked paper ballots. So why would we go back to that system when we have these ballot marking devices that are a whole lot harder, despite the presence of Italian satellites or whatever the heck rumor is floating around now? It's a whole lot harder to steal ballots off of electronic devices like the ballot marking devices we use than it is with a stack of paper ballots that we're going to hand mark. And you spend all your time arguing what is a real mark. What a voter X'd out, put an X over the candidate's name. Is that a vote or is that an expression that they don't like that person? It's just you spend a lot of time in court arguing over those sorts of things when a ballot marking device knows where to put the mark and you can review it and you can count it. Machines are really, really good at counting. So, that puts me in the minority on this issue because I know a lot of people want to go back to hand marked ballots, and a lot of other states do that, and that's fine. But seems to me we have a pretty good system. There are always things. When I was in the legislature, there was an elections bill following every elections. The normal process was local elections officials would communicate with the Secretary of State of things that cropped up in their local election. That information was gathered together, reviewed, discussed among elections officials, the Secretary of State's office, and other experts, and then a bill would come forward to say, here's incremental steps we need to take to address whatever various issues popped up in the previous election. That was the normal course of business. So we shouldn't necessarily be upset that an elections bill comes forward. The question is, does this make incremental improvements in our system, or is this taking a step back? So I know it's a long answer, but this is it's very, very important. I ran for Secretary of State in 2018. Every campaign stop I made, this was before Stacey Abrams started talking about voter suppression, and well before Donald Trump did all the stuff that he did. But I was concerned back then that too many people who identify as Democrats and Republicans have distrust in our system. And that is a very dangerous thing that was bad back in 2018. It's a whole lot worse now.
True.
Yeah. Chairwoman Cupid, I feel free to jump in, but I'm especially interested in sort of as we saw a conversation yesterday with both Secretary of State Raffensperger and President Trump discussing the nationalization of elections. I'm not sure how that would even be possible, but it is something that's in the water right now. And Buzz talking about the natural process of things. It's run on the grassroots level of local officials, and information filters up from there. But if you have any perspective from a county level of the importance of running elections on that level, as well as any of the other topics that Buzz and Kathleen were talking about.
Yes, the impact of what's going on now is having reverberating impact on the confidence in elections amongst our citizens. We've already seen that degraded throughout the pandemic, and adding on a federal layer and the significance of a raid on a local operation only just exacerbates the distrust or concerns that people have around the veracity of elections, and that truly is misfortunate. While there may be improvements that could be made through elections policies, every change that's made at the state level has profound impact in how we operate. Elections is not a 24/7 activity. There are a lot of volunteers, temporary workers that are brought in to these operations, and having sustainable systems helps us to ensure consistency and reliability of our processes. So whenever there are changes and whenever something significant like what's happening now takes place, it rattles a system that needs to run tightly. And right now, our offices, we are duplicating files just to be prepared if something like this were to happen here. And I've talked to my peers across other jurisdictions who are taking other precautions as well, recognizing that, Fulton is significant. Also, if you look at the 5 largest counties, we have 40% of the voting population here in the state. It makes us perceive ourselves to be, a vulnerable target that, is this raid just about concern of how elections operated? Was something nefarious done? Or is this an attempt at control to produce a certain outcome? And this is not something that we're just conjuring up at the top of our head. There were actual efforts to look into specific jurisdictions to count votes in the 2020 election. And so I don't see how any of this helps to improve the trust that our citizens have in elections. I think removing the activity from a local operation to not even a state, but going to a federal type of system, I perceive under these very strange set of circumstances, and I use that word quite generously, that it would only breathe a much greater sense of distrust in our elections.
Thank you. It's very concerning. And I just want to clarify my prior comment that Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger yesterday warned about not trying to federalize elections.
Okay.
And we weren't doing that.
Okay.
But minutes later, the president said he would like to nationalize elections. So I just want to, clarify the record about where he stands on this issue and the protection he's trying to give to our system. But that doesn't mean that it's not coming from the top down.
Sarah, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to say, on the federal level, with Tom Albus out of St. Louis, Missouri, the DOJ, this is something we should all keep an eye on. This is much larger than just Fulton County. He's been authorized to look into election integrity across the country. I want to note that we here in Fulton County are very familiar with the people who run the elections here, and of course, while he has, that's his remit to do that from St. Louis. There is a certain amount, as Lisa was saying, of this trust in the local election infrastructure, election workers, election officials that we have here, certainly in Fulton County. That would be important, and people like Marvin Arrington, who's on the Fulton County Commission, I think have spoken out, and an attorney has spoken very eloquently to some of the real concerns here.
And the St. Louis U.S. Attorney's Office is the one that put in the application for the warrant to obtain the warrant for the raid in Fulton County. Typically, that would be coming from the U.S. Attorney's Office in Atlanta, not from St. Louis. So it's an aberrant process because he's been charged with, this national mission to look at voter fraud from the White House. So any other comments we want to make on that? Otherwise, I'm going to move on to another hot topic.
If I could just add,
absolutely, please.
The Constitution gives states the primary lead in the conducting of elections. And so there's a little matter of the Constitution here when we talk about federalizing elections. And I note that Republicans were very opposed to a Democratic bill not that long ago. I believe it was called the John Lewis Elections Act. Republicans were vehemently opposed to that bill because in their mind it weakened that idea of states being the primary one to run elections. And now we have a Republican president wanted to nationalize elections. Really bad idea. Really bad.
Yes.
Scary. But it's important to talk about as much as we can to make sure that everybody's informed.
Yep.
I'm going to switch over to law enforcement and immigration, another big topic. We have, of course, in recent months been having a national conversation about immigration enforcement. We've seen the deployment of federal immigration authorities into U.S. cities far from the border. Agents from ICE and CBP have clashed with protesters and observers, resulting in the deaths of multiple citizens. From a GFAF perspective, we've been closely monitoring First Amendment rights and retaliation for people exercising those rights in response to immigration enforcement. We've seen just days ago journalists arrested for covering immigration-related protests. At other times in the last few months, we have seen journalists pepper sprayed, protesters hit with rubber bullets, gas, a lot of retaliation against protesters. From a data privacy perspective, we have also recently seen CBP agents using facial recognition on protesters. And, those folks have reported that they are days later losing, certain rights like global entry. And they seem to, there seems to be a database of protesters who are being targeted with the powers of the federal government. It's fair to say that this issue is going to hang over session, even if we might not see much direct legislation about it here in Georgia, just because it's a little more federal and there isn't as much appetite for some of the other bills that we have seen. And some Democratic legislatures have passed bills about masking of agents and things like that. I doubt we will see something like that here in Georgia, but that conversation will certainly have an impact on the legislative session. Buzz, I'm going to start with you. The Georgia Center for Opportunity advocates crime reduction that focuses law enforcement efforts on more violent offenders. Much of the immigration enforcement attention right now that we've seen has been directed toward capturing people either that don't have previous criminal convictions or with older nonviolent convictions. The bump in people that are in immigration detention over the last year has almost entirely come from that group of people as opposed to more violent offenders. So I wonder, what's the center's perspective and guidance to local communities who are balancing immigration enforcement and other policing priorities right now?
Yeah, the kind of things that we do at the Georgia Center for Opportunity that we advocate for there are best practices around the country that we see various law enforcement agencies and entities implement that increase public safety, reduce crime, but also at the same time build trust with the community that they are meant to protect. We set up a organization, well, not a formal organization, but a working group in Columbus just this way, brought together political leaders, law enforcement leaders, as well as community groups and people on the ground who are there on the streets talking to folks, trying to encourage them to live a better way rather than pursue a life of crime. And we bring all those folks to the table. Here are the best practices that we see around the country, and how do we implement that? I mean, that's not what we're seeing going on here in the enforcement of immigration laws. Polling, even now, shows that a majority of Americans want our immigration laws enforced. They don't want violent people to sneak into this country to do horrible things. The question then becomes, how do you go about enforcing that law? And I think, unfortunately, a decision was made by Kristi Noem that confrontation was the way you go about this, and therefore you have organized groups of protesters who also want to confront. There's elements of both sides who seem to think that confrontation benefits them. And this is just my opinion, but in my opinion, that's led to the tragic results that you mentioned earlier, Sarah, where we've had people die. That's horrible. Everybody needs to take a step back. In my opinion, everybody needs to take a step back and calm down and say, all right, how can we talk with each other about the best way to go about enforcing our laws and keeping our communities safe? We don't want gang members who are part of drug cartels from other countries coming into the United States and being active in our communities, in any community in this state. How do we go about enforcing that? How can the federal law enforcement entities like ICE work with local law enforcement in a constructive way? That's obviously not happening in Minneapolis or in Minnesota. You've got a hostile relationship between those entities. How do we work together to enforce the laws well? So I think the first thing is both sides need to say confrontation is not the way to go. Working within the political system is the way to go. There are lawsuits that can be filed. There are political pressure that can be brought to bear. Those sorts of things, as opposed to violent confrontation on the streets. And, that's what I would do if I were there, but I'm not there. I'm here. So all I can do is in my sphere of influence urge those sorts of things to happen. And that's the kind of stuff we do at GCO is urge community engagement and cooperation for shared goals.
Chairwoman Cupid, do you want to jump in or talk about, law enforcement from your perspective and what you're seeing?
Yeah, and this has been an acute issue for many of our residents. We can speak about this from a policy perspective, but there are real people living with real fear every day. There are people who are afraid to leave their homes. There are classes that have a lot less students attending them. There are businesses that see their patronage and churches that are seeing their membership go down because of absolute fear that a number of our residents have today. We've been talking with our members of our community, partnering them with law enforcement to let them know that we see their concerns, we understand them, and letting them know that we are here to protect them. We do recognize our limitations, that their federal government certainly has a supreme jurisdiction when it comes to immigration. But what I've recently done with some of my peers on our board, we've sent a letter to our federal officials asking them to investigate any lethal use of force when it comes to confrontation with immigration enforcement. We've asked for training in de-escalation, and that they would use some other best practices, some cultural sensitivity training in how they are dealing with people. And something to me, which I think is the most egregious concern of not just members of our primarily Spanish-speaking community who have been primarily targeted through these efforts, is that those that are engaged in enforcement are properly identified and their vehicles are clearly marked. We've had citizens question, how do we know whether or not there's an abduction occurring in our community or whether or not this is a legitimate immigration enforcement activity? And that creates a stress for everyone. And so I agree with a prior panelists. Yes, certainly, I think we can do what we can do to reduce confrontation, but there are some practices in the act of enforcement that I think can help dial down the temperature that we've seen displayed nationally when it comes to the lethal use of force and protest with respect to immigration enforcement.
Kathleen, I know a lot of your work focuses on elections, but it does seem to me like these issues have some link. And, I'll just throw out as a data point that Attorney General Pam Bondi sent a letter to the governor of Minnesota offering to remove ICE and CBP officers from the state if they handed over election records to DOJ. So it's not just me that thinks there is some connection. Do you have any perspective on that or anything else that we've been talking about on this topic?
Yeah, thanks. So certainly immigration and deportation sort of enforcement has been a big priority of this administration. And, Pam Bondi is in many ways doing her job as the Attorney General. In other ways, I think raising enormous questions about this effort to basically have Minnesota comply with demands. And it looks very, let's just say, questionable as to why she's actually, the timing of Alex Preddy and this letter on the exact same day is just is sort of, I think, makes us think as Americans, like what do we stand for and what are we about, and who does represent sort of the direction that our country is going in. And I will say that here in Georgia, again, in terms of elections and the interrelation between sort of immigration issues and protests and sort of any impact on elections, the exaggeration and the scaremongering, frankly, that non-citizens are somehow terrorizing the voter. I mean, it's laughable. It is honestly a joke. I mean, as a lot of this stuff is, it's hard to even yes, we have concerns. Voter rolls need to be cleaned, they need to be maintained. But really, I mean, out of over 8 million registered voters, and to have 20 even indications of non-citizens who were on those rolls. 20 out of over 8 million in Brad Raffensperger's audit that was conducted in October of 2024. I mean, we are talking minuscule. And then to see people on the state election board standing up, again, talking about only citizens can vote here, it is really taking this whole thing to a really new level that we should come on. Let's think about this here, folks. I mean, really? We're here? This is not where our priority should be on non-citizen, infiltration of our voting apparatus. That is a disservice to the voters, and certainly in Georgia and across the country. So I hope we're all going to continue to call that out. That's my take on that question, Sarah.
Thank you. I'll give either of you a last chance to talk about elections. Otherwise, I'll move on to our final topic. Okay. This next topic, we're going to talk about data centers, which is in some ways a lower temperature issue, but also in some ways not, because it's getting a lot of focus on the Capitol, a lot of focus in election discussions as we look toward a gubernatorial election in the fall. That's already been a big topic in our statewide elections this year, as Georgia has really become a ground zero for the construction of new data centers, their impact on communities environmentally, and on utility rates and the cost of electricity, which we saw was a big issue already last year in the Public Service Commission elections. A lot of voters expressing displeasure with electricity rates and things of that nature. So there are a range of proposals this year in the session addressing data centers. SB 34 would prohibit rate increases on customers to address data center usage, and trying to prevent the cost of data centers increased power usage from being imposed on individual electricity users. HB 258 would require, this is really an information and transparency bill, which we always like those here at the Georgia First Amendment Foundation. This would require larger data centers to submit annual public disclosures to the government on their usage rates of water and of energy. SB 410 and SB 48 are two proposals that would end tax credits for these projects. A similar bill actually passed in 2024, but it was vetoed by Governor Kemp. So it is kind of coming back up now that the issue is more salient. And then HB 1012 would put a 1-year moratorium on new data center construction. So we've also seen local officials pause data centers. The DeKalb County Commission recently voted to extend a pause that they had in place on new applications for these type of projects through the end of June. Chairwoman Cupid, I'm going to start with you. What's the update on data centers in Cobb, and what are you doing to make sure that local citizens have access to information about them and a say?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. I can understand the desire to pause and have a moratorium because there's opportunity to ensure that our zoning codes, our development guides are current to regulate this particular type of development. In Cobb County, we're going through a complete zoning code revamp, and we have some codes that have been in place from 1970s, and our code to date does not include data centers. And so I think what's sending some maybe shockwaves through communities that have had data centers approach them is that without having a code in place, it could easily fast track those being developed without understanding the impact that it's going to have on the community. As we're updating, we do have a new code to address data centers, and it will be our desire for data centers to go through a general zoning process, which does provide information to the public with respect to an application for zoning, but also to layer on what's called a special land use permit process, which has additional dozen questions that are asked of the applicant to address the impacts that it's going to have on the surrounding community, which is very important. Their environmental impacts, their noise impacts, certainly energy usage impacts that and cost impacts that citizens are quite sensitive to. And I think that should be made very clear. So I can understand the desire to slow things down. If the state does it, it helps to protect all 159 counties to ensure that we have something in place. And it's not to say that they are not welcome. We just don't want to be in a position. We've talked to some of our counterparts in the state of Virginia, which once led the development of data centers. And they've had to learn as they go, and they've had some rough patches, but they have a lot of things that they can now share as best practices. And we just want to make sure that we have the ability to take advantage of that and codify it.
Buzz, I want to give you a chance to jump in and any perspective you can share on the data center issue. I know you're at the Capitol pretty frequently, and if you've heard anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very interesting issue because it brings together a lot of different issues that are debated at the Capitol all the time. Local control, I mean, zoning is a local matter. How far should the state stick its nose in that, for example? And of course, as you mentioned, Sarah, environmental issues, jobs. Politicians love bringing jobs to their community, so there's that powerful draw too. But I think, to me, I think what the state should focus on, I think one of the bills you mentioned, SB 34, I believe that's by Senator Huffstetler. It, the, every other business in the state of Georgia is expected to pay the full cost of their power. I used to work at a manufacturing company. We used a lot of power. We didn't go to the legislature and ask the county commission and say, can other people help us pay the cost of that power? We understood that's the cost of doing business. And so I think, I in my mind, Senator Huffstetler's approach is step one that the state should consider. How do we protect and make sure that just like every other company in the state of Georgia, that data centers are paying for their own power and not asking others to help pay for that. So I think that's the way to go. I fear that moratoriums, as proposed in what HB 1012, this kind of calls back to our first discussion about AI. All this is happening because AI is booming. And these data centers are going to be built somewhere. So if there's a moratorium, then that means they're not going to be built in the state of Georgia. They're going to be built somewhere else. And we lose out forever on those opportunities. So I think I think we start with Senator Huffstetler's bill. We work with local communities and to protect their right to zone as they see fit. Maybe there's some, as Commissioner Cupid mentioned, there's things we can learn from other states, things that some communities in Georgia are doing that other communities can learn from, to do this in a thoughtful way that protects our citizens. And so,
thank you. Kathleen, I don't know if you have a final word on it, but we are out of time, so I can give you an excuse if you don't.
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks, and I think the more that we can see the Golden Dome being a place for bringing together people and discussing things in a way that reflects how we all love to get along with our neighbors, the better. And I just wanted to say that I think this kind of dialogue goes a long way towards sort of bringing people's attention to what's going on and how we can all engage. So thank you, and to the Georgia First Amendment Foundation for hosting.
yes, thanks for having us. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I agree about, the focus on neighbors. I'm trying to hold that close myself. I am going to toss things to Julia Boyd for the Georgia Press Club's presentation, but thank you to each of our panelists for sharing their time and their expertise this morning. We really appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Thanks.
Thank you,
for having
Sarah.
us.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sarah, and thank you to all of our first section of panelists. I'm Julia Boyd. I'm the Executive Director for the Atlanta Press Club, and we appreciate you joining us this morning. And thank you to our partner for this program, the Georgia First Amendment Foundation. The Atlanta Press Club is a 501c3 nonprofit and has been supporting journalists since 1964. For more information on APC, including membership, events, and education, please visit atlantapressclub.org. Today's program will also be recorded and be available on our YouTube channel for viewing. Also, please note there will be a time to ask questions if we have time at the end of the program, so please utilize the chat bot. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's portion of the program, the Reporters Roundtable, Faith Jessie from 11 Alive News. And Faith will introduce the rest of our panelists. Welcome, Faith, and thank you.
Hi, Julia. Good morning, and good morning to everyone attending. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you to Sarah and the previous panel. What an incredible conversation. My name is Faith Jessie. I'm a news anchor at 11 Alive News, as well as a politics reporter. And I do a program called The Georgia Vote every Sunday, where we cover everything from Washington to under the Gold Dome. And I'm so happy to be joined by some incredible journalists today to take you through a journey of what is happening in our state capitol. First up is Maya Homan. She covers politics, voting rights, and immigration for the Georgia Recorder. Previously, she worked as a fellow for USA Today, covering Georgia politics and the 2024 presidential election. Tagami is the bureau chief at the Capitol Beat News Service, where he covers Georgia state government actions and legislative policy developments for 139 member newspapers. He previously worked for the AJC, where he covered state education, Atlanta City Hall, the governments of DeKalb and Fulton counties, and the school systems in Cobb and DeKalb counties. David Wickert is with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. He's been a reporter at the AJC since 2010, and he writes about the state budget, finance, and voting issues. Previously, he covered local government and politics in Gwinnett and Fulton counties. Prior to arriving in Atlanta, he worked for newspapers in Washington State, Illinois, Virginia, and Tennessee. So I want to welcome the panel and thank you once again for everyone who is joining us this morning. We are going to have a couple of crossover topics to what you just heard from with Miss Sarah's panel, but all of these topics are top of mind under the Gold Dome right now. And so that's why everybody wants to talk about them, right? I want to start off the conversation with the state budget surplus. And David, I want to bring you in here because you just wrote an article last week talking about one of the proposals from House Speaker John Burns last Wednesday, unveiling his plan to eliminate property taxes on primary single-family residences. It would phase out homestead properties taxes by 2032, eliminating more than $5 billion in annual revenue for schools and local governments across the state. Affordability is a big topic this session, David. A lot of Republicans see tax cuts as a means to get there.
Yes, that has been a theme for many years now. The state kind of finds itself with a lot of cash on hand since the pandemic. The Georgia has accumulated billions of dollars of budget surpluses and rainy day funds. It actually peaked last year at about $16 billion. It's now about $14.5 billion, but that is far above historical norms. And the question that becomes, well, what do we do with all that extra money? Governor Kemp's priority in recent years has been to give it back to taxpayers. His budget that he just unveiled last month includes another round of tax rebates for income taxpayers. They did the same thing last year. You might have gotten a check last summer. They're talking about doing the same thing this year. Folks in the Senate have a different idea about how to spend some of that money. They'd like to eliminate the income tax altogether. In the first year, they would use some of that budget surplus to help pay for that. But the income tax generates about $16 billion a year. The personal income tax does. That's a 40-something% share of the state budget. It would be a big lift if they were to do that, and it would take more than just using some budget surplus.
Yeah. Ty, I want to bring you in here and on the affordability note. When we were doing our interviews, a lot of us talking to the lawmakers getting ready for session, I mean, that was the buzzword, right? Not just here in Georgia, but across the country. How can we put more money in people's pockets? What are you hearing on the other side of the aisle about how to get there? Democrats and Republicans both want to reach this affordability consensus, but they want to go by things a little differently, Ty.
Yeah. Hey, first of all, thanks for having me here. It's a pleasure to be here. I think Democrats, as you can anticipate, feel very differently about how we should approach affordability. They want, far more aggressive moves on all the issues from healthcare, expanding Medicaid to housing subsidies. It's a very long list. They couldn't be farther apart on that issue. Republicans are definitely talking about affordability. Their approach to it is essentially cutting taxes, like David said. So income tax, property tax, tax rebates that are in the Governor Kemp's current budget. So yeah, I think the Democrats would want to go a lot farther because they would like to spend some of that $10 billion that we would still have in our rainy day fund or, reserves, whatever you want to call it.
That's right. That's right. Spending more. And then I'll keep this question open to any of you. You can take it. Are there any notable differences between what we saw proposed from Governor Kemp during his State of the State to what legislators are proposing with using this budget surplus?
Yeah, I mean, the governor, again, wants to emphasize returning the money to taxpayers. Um, the Senate would like to use some of the money that they would return it to taxpayers differently, I guess. Their plan is to eliminate the tax altogether. The governor has sort of signaled that uh, major changes to the way governments fund themselves might not be a good idea. He has not come out against eliminating the income tax, but in his State of the State address, he indicated, it's good to have extra money in the bank because you don't know what's coming. Will there be a recession? Will there be something else that we need that money for? And I think there's some tension there.
Thank you all so much. Let's change gears here if we can to education. There's so much to talk about in the world of education. And Maya, I want to bring you in on this to ask you. I love to leave this open because I love to pick the minds of journalists to see what you are thinking about, what is top of mind. But I also know that you have written about and have spoken to the Dream Scholarship. So what are you seeing under the Gold Dome, Maya?
Yes, so thank you so much for having me. I will say it's still very early in the session. I believe today is Legislative Day 11. So as far as the Dream Scholarships go, there's still a lot that remains to be seen about how exactly this would play out, who would be eligible, like how much it would cover per person. But it is very interesting that, Governor Kemp in his final year in office is talking about funding a needs-based scholarship. A lot of Democrats, responding to his State of the State address, were saying this is something that we've been asking for years, and they, expressed a lot of enthusiasm about that idea.
Yeah, I mean, potentially signaling that we could see some bipartisan support in getting that issue passed.
Definitely.
Eventually. Ty, I also want to bring you in to talk about some legislation. I know just yesterday we saw the introduction of yet another cell phone ban, which seems to be popular across the aisle. What else are you watching for? Of course, this is in addition to the one that passed last session.
You know what? For education, there isn't a lot of other legislation at this point. We heard all sorts of well, not all sorts. There were several study committees over the summer that addressed some really um, nagging issues that, maybe developed or were exacerbated by the pandemic and haven't really gone away. One of them is chronic absenteeism. That's kids missing a lot of the school year. And obviously that's a bad thing. And that was made very plain during the study committees over the summer. But I've not seen any legislation that tries to address that head on. It's a really deep issue. Money would be involved. You need services for the families that, there's any number of reasons that kids are missing school. It could be as simple as they don't have a washing machine and they don't have clean clothes, so they're just skipping. They don't have a car and they miss the school bus. There's, and all of this came out, but I've not seen anything yet on that issue. Instead, we are talking about cell phones, and yes, that's a very, very popular issue. The surveys of parents, teachers, and students find, there is some concern about what do you do in a school shooting, and that's a very salient concern given what happened at Appalachia High. But it's still an overwhelming support for a ban, like 3 out of 4, roughly, parents and teachers, and surprisingly, students too, are saying that in schools that have banned cell phones voluntarily, because the bans don't go into effect till next fall. There's a K-8, kindergarten through 8th grade ban that they passed last year. It goes into effect in the fall, but a bunch of schools have already they were just chomping at the bit to do this. And so there have been researchers have been studying the impact. They've had some data, and they've just found, there's a lot less disruption in the classrooms. Kids aren't being sent in for discipline as much. Kids are talking to each other instead of fighting. So, and grades are up. So, yeah, we're definitely going to see that one pass, I think. I would predict.
It seems like there's a lot of bipartisan support. We actually spoke, Doug Richards, I'm sure a lot of you all are familiar with him, did a story yesterday where he spoke with a college student who said, yeah, we need this to happen. David, I want to bring you in on this too. In regards to education, are there any carryover policies, unfinished business from last session that we could see brought up again this year?
Well, in terms of education policy, I'm not, I'll be honest, I'm not sure. That's not my area, but I can tell you education funding is sort of a big issue every year. And you mentioned the Speaker Burns's property tax proposal. That's probably something that local school districts care a lot about. The proposal would, over time, eliminate property taxes on homestead properties. That's the house you live in, that you own and live in. It would eliminate, as you said, about $5 billion in revenue a year for local school districts, county and city governments. And the school districts are concerned that how are we going to make up for that money?
Right.
One way is the legislation that's been proposed would allow schools to repurpose existing sales taxes that they have. Perhaps they have a tax that helps pay for school construction. Well, they could use some of that money for operations. Another way they could make up the money is to charge, quote, assessments on property as opposed to taxes, which are based on the value of your property. An assessment would be more based on what does it cost the service, what does it cost to provide a particular service, and then you split up the difference among property owners. But they're still working to define how an assessment would work. Would it be based on the square footage of your house? Would it be based on how many bedrooms you have? Things like that. And so I think there's a lot of nervous school board members and city council and county commissioners who are waiting to see how that plays out.
Thank you so much for that, David. Let's change. Go ahead, Ty.
Oh, I was going to throw out one thing that we're probably are going to hear about with education, and that's the vouchers. The Georgia Promise Scholarship passed, whenever it passed, was it 2 years already? Anyway, that gives a direct, it's the first direct payment in a long time that Georgia has had to private schools or to students at private schools to pay for their tuition and other related costs. So that passed, and I imagine we'll see attempts to expand it because that's what's happened with other voucher-like legislation in the past. We have a thing called tax credits. We've had that for years, and there've been fights over it for years. And a matter of fact, I just saw a new bill drop in connection with another voucher. It's a federal one that you may remember. So much is happening, but I think it was just last week that Governor Kemp signed an IRS document that opted Georgia into the federal. It's a tax credit type. So you give money, you get it all back, and that money can then go to a student at a private school. And the legislation would take that beyond like an executive order and codify it so that the State Department of Revenue would always be tied into this federal voucher system.
Yeah. And you picked my head because I was actually about to go to you and ask you about school vouchers. So thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay. Look, we're all on the same wavelength. Thank you so much for that, Ty. Let's change gears here to immigration. Obviously, very big in headlines right now, given what we are seeing in Minnesota and around the country with immigration enforcement. Maya, I want to bring you in on this topic. I want to start with HB 1053 proposed by Representative Marvin Lim of Norcross and a group of House members. It would undo the 2024 Georgia Criminal Alien Track Report Act law that requires local sheriff's office to check the immigration status of people booked into county jails and for the office to honor requests for ICE to detain immigrant inmates past their original scheduled release date so federal agents can pick them up. What is the talk right now with immigration? Could we see something like this HB 1053 proposed by a Democrat gain support or potentially not?
I think that remains to be seen, honestly. I think Democrats in the House and the Senate have both introduced legislation meant to curb a lot of ICE agents' power. There's bills, that would require ICE agents to display badges and, prevent them from wearing masks while they're on duty making arrests. There's other bills that would require like a judicial warrant for agents to conduct immigration operations in schools or on college campuses or in places of worship. I think one really compelling thing that might get Republicans in both chambers to jump on board is now kind of Second Amendment concerns following the death of Alex Peretti, and gun rights groups saying, hey, you shouldn't be killed at a protest because you're carrying a gun. That violates the Second Amendment. So it remains to be seen if Republicans kind of join with Democrats or if they try and introduce their own proposals to counter theirs.
Maya, a follow-up for you. In your reporting, what do you take is the priority in regards to immigration enforcement, or excuse me, immigration legislation in general for Republicans and for Democrats?
I don't know. I mean, I think with every issue, there's going to be priorities by party, and then there's also going to be priorities by different chambers. Typically, the House and the Senate both have, similar but kind of, I guess, warring ideas sometimes. And they both want to be the one to have their proposal succeed. So at this point, I would say it's just too early to tell.
It's pretty early. It is pretty early, but thank you so much for digging in and answering that question. Ty, David, I also want to bring you all in the conversation. I know you cover budgets, and I know, Ty, you cover a lot of education policies, but I mean, immigration is tied into all of this, really. And I'll just leave this as an open question from both of you and say, in your reporting, is there a sense that the voter wants to see something come out of this body from immigration? Ty or David?
I depends which voter. I would say, yeah, but I mean, an example would be, I think Democrats have like at least 6 bills that would basically try to curb the federal government's current immigration, immigration enforcement efforts. Everything from everything you've seen on TV. So everything from banning masks and allowing citizens to sue agents directly, requiring warrants, like Maya said. But then on the other side, I noticed a bill by a Republican, Ginny Earhart in Cobb County, that would ban the use of an automobile to obstruct a law enforcement investigation. I'm not exactly sure what that's about, but I think we can guess. So, and I imagine she's doing what her constituents want. So that's a really tough question to answer. It really depends, but there definitely isn't any one sort of, there isn't a consensus on this issue, put it that way.
Yeah, it's also, a midterm election year, right? So it's going to be interesting to see what actually, if there is something that's controversial, what does get passed. Let's move on here, if we can, to AI and elections, another crossover topic from the previous panel, but still so much to talk about. I want to bring up just kind of some unfinished business, I would say, from 2025. We did see a bill to criminalize AI-generated child pornography that kind of transformed into a version of a bill targeting political deepfakes. And I will leave this open to anyone who feels comfortable to taking this question. With this election coming up, obviously whatever is passed this session could have real implications come November. Could we see this kind of like AI deep fake misinformation, any legislation on that passing this session, excuse me?
I mean, I'll take a stab at that. I think it's really like everybody's wrestling with this issue, right? There's no clear consensus, I think, on AI. And if you go back and look at uh, federal politics, like remember Marjorie Taylor Greene, like she was at odds with the president over artificial intelligence, allow whether states should have the right to regulate it, right? And so even within the Republican Party, I think there is a lot of debate. Yes, there is an AI bill that was debated yesterday, but it it kind of goes to traditional sort of battleground topic for Republicans. And it was about essentially pornography, um, and that is something that you will see coming up almost annually in bills like for the last few years, not this year, but the last few years, we had legislation that would remove a shield for librarians who give kids books that, quote unquote, are obscene. And the problem with or the challenge with that is that obscenity is in the eye of the beholder, as a Supreme Court, justice once famously said, and I know it when I see it. Everybody, there's no common ground on that. People totally disagree about what's obscene and what isn't. So that's and the bill that they were debating yesterday, that was at the crux of it. It came down to, and ACLU and others were raised the objection that you're potentially criminalizing, well, 16-year-olds because they're, it's up to that age that were affected by the criminal the criminalizing elements of the legislation. And as people pointed out, 16-year-olds, especially boys, have a reputation for making dumb decisions. And so you give them this powerful tool like AI, and all of a sudden they do something illegal by putting someone's face on, manipulating someone's image, and they're criminals for life. So yeah, that one, they'll be hashing that one out for a while, I think, because it's a really challenging question.
Ty, isn't there also a bill out there that would uh, prohibit like deep fakes in campaign ads or something along those
I
lines?
think something like that was floating around, but I don't know that it has surfaced. I've not seen any debate on it yet, but there was something out there. But at the same time, I mean, the people are, lawmakers can be victims of this, but can also use it. So it's a double-edged sword, right? So I think that we're going to be seeing some nuanced approaches to that.
And I will also add that we have seen, at least, late last year in the US Senate race, an example of this used where Mike Collins's campaign released a AI generated video of John Ossoff, I believe, talking about the government shutdown. Um, and it sparked a lot of controversy. And Ossoff's campaign came out and promised to not use AI generated videos of his opponents. The three, Republicans running did not promise the same. So we're seeing this legislation floated around. We're also seeing this play out in real time.
And it will be also interesting to see, will something happen at the federal level? Because with AI, it has gotten, 5 years ago, they say, look for the fourth finger. They have four fingers. It's not real. And now it's very hard to tell. They are getting very, very good. So it'll be interesting to see here what happens here in the future. In regards, that's the AI part of it. Let's talk about elections. Once again, a little bit of overlap from the last panel, but I do want to get your thoughts on this. I know that Sarah and her panel brought up Senate Bill 214, talking about these paper ballots. Obviously, we saw the FBI search of the Fulton County's hub last week, which caused a big stir. But when it comes to elections, we saw some Senate bills, obviously in previous years, that change rules at what you can do at the voting polls, right? And Democrats trying to get rid of some of those laws as well. We are moving into an election year. Ty, Maya, David, what are you all seeing under the Gold Dome in regards to election protections and secure elections? Because we saw this last round, at least the presidential election in 2024, we had the most secure elections. That's what we were hearing from Republicans. We had the most secure elections. Donald Trump won Georgia. It was great. But then 2020 was not so great. Then we have on the other side of the aisle, Democrats saying some of these bills that have become law are now restrictive. They are taking away our voting rights. We need to make sure that we turn that around. Anyone can take this. I want to leave it open. I don't want to put anybody on the spot.
To me, it's just kind of remarkable that, the 2020 election was so traumatic, almost for lack of a better word, in our politics that it created tremendous distrust among Republicans in the outcome. And because you have the president of the United States with the largest bullhorn in the world making that accusation. The following session, 2021, there were, I can't remember how many bills introduced to change election procedures. Ultimately, a pretty comprehensive bill passed, and it was portrayed at the time as, we have addressed the issue, but we've been addressing it every year since, because the doubt is still there, and I think we'll continue to see it. I imagine for at least as long as the president of the United States claims that his election was stolen.
And it's interesting because there is doubt there, but there are also some Republicans who say, hey, it's time to move on from this. Why are we going back to this?
They seem to be losing that battle.
Sorry. I spent an inordinate amount of time last summer and I guess fall reporting on a special blue ribbon, they call it, committee looking at election procedures, where they held like 6 hearings across the state, 8-hour days, where they heard essentially the same testimony over and over and over again for like 50 hours, which is, our elections are insecure on one hand, and it's because we have these QR codes on our ballots, and you can't verify that your QR code matches, how you voted. That's on the one hand, because you can't read a QR code because we're humans. And then on the other hand, you have our Secretary of State's office and his supporters saying, look, we've gone over this repeatedly with audits and hand counts and everything, and the results are extremely accurate. So I don't think the two sides are ever going to meet. It seems they're on an opposite trajectory. But yesterday, that study committee finally issued their report, and their report, funny, on the one hand, it said it's pretty simple, right? They said, let's. By the way, there is law. David mentioned, they passed a bunch of laws. One of them was we can't use the QR code starting July 1st. Problem is, it would cost a lot of money, and there hasn't been any budgeted to replace our Dominion voting machines all across the state. So we're stuck with QR codes, it seems. But yesterday, that Blue Ribbon Committee recommended that we use the same system, it appears, but hand count the results, use hand marked ballots, kind of ignore the QR code except as a backup means of counting, and actually hand count. So to buy time to then put money in the budget to buy all new machines for, after the 2026 general election. So that's their recommendation. And the funny part is they asked to also be able to continue meeting through the end of the year, which, it's like, it doesn't seem that complicated to me. It's like if you don't like QR codes, then you buy a new system that doesn't have QR codes. But anyway, they wanted to keep meeting. The chairman of that committee is running for Secretary of State, and one of his opponents, whose wife is on the state education board, immediately said, well, that's a dumb idea. You guys have been meeting endlessly. We don't need any more talk. Let's go ahead and do something. So that is a very politicized issue for sure. And I imagine we will see some sort of resolution because the law says they have to resolve it before they leave on April 2nd.
One thing I did also just want to jump in and add, I reported on this late last year, and one of the things that election officials that I've been talking to said is that, if we want to have these elections with hand-marked paper ballots, if we want this to run smoothly with new equipment, whatever that may be, we need about 6 months to be able to comfortably implement this. And so when you factor in 3 weeks of early voting, they would need the new equipment, they say, by about mid-April. in order for them to have kind of like a clean, successful rollout for 2026, which I think to me seems very unlikely that lawmakers will have everything finalized, have all the new equipment, in the elections offices by then. Of course, anything's possible, but just wanted to kind of, share that.
It's really interesting. And that would be what, 6 months till November. We have primaries in May, which could really set the tone for.
They can still use the existing machines for the primary. They can, because the QR ban doesn't kick in until July 1st. But there's another, and David can step in on this. There's another wrinkle in just this recommendation that came out yesterday for the hand count, because hand counts apparently cost a lot of money, because Governor Kemp put $5 million in the budget for just hand counting two different races, re-hand counting two different races in the general election. That's just, I mean, we got a lot of races on the general election, and we'd have to hand count them all. So I imagine that would cost quite a bit, but I don't really know. Maybe that'll.
Yeah, I haven't seen an estimate of how much that might cost, but I don't think $5 million would probably cover it.
Yeah.
And also when it comes to election security, a lot of the people who testified during the special Blue Ribbon Study Committee said, like, hand-marked paper ballots are, the safest, the most secure. But that's not necessarily true of hand counting. Like, machine tabulation tends to be very fast, very efficient. It's something machines do very well. It's not really something humans do all that quickly or all that efficiently.
Some people say you could prevent a lot of human error. I have several more topics that I want to speak with you all about, but I do know that the time is 9:20. We're supposed to wrap at 9:30. And as promised, we want to open up the floor for questions from everyone watching. So I will bring up one topic just to give you all some time to gather your questions, but please feel free to write them in the webinar chat. Oh, it looks like maybe I don't need to bring them in because people are already having their questions come in. I do have one from Mitch Leff. He says, am I correct that state law allows guns to be carried anywhere in the state except for the Capitol? Anybody have the answer to that?
Well, I mean, I don't, if a private, if a business or, private landowner says, no, you have it, then you can't carry them there. I mean, that's sort of true. You can't carry them in a courthouse either. Can't carry them at the airport. So yeah, there are some restrictions, but definitely can't carry them at the legislature.
Right. Here's another question. How has the Capitol reporter pool changed, and who is covering Capitol issues important to places like South Georgia and rural areas?
Ty, was that somebody you planted?
Yeah, right. That is, in fact, our mission at Capitol Beat. We're a project of the Georgia Press Association that has more than 130 member newspapers, and we are like a wire service, and we send stories to them. So we'll cover things that maybe aren't such button issues in urban areas like forestry. There's $14 million in Kemp's budget to help the industry in part. We're talking about Hurricane Helene. But this is more looking forward to different technologies and markets for products. So yeah, that's our role. We try to look at through a statewide lens at the issues that we cover.
I will also say that at the Georgia Recorder, we try and do the same thing. Our articles are free for everyone to read, free for them to republish on their sites. And we do try to focus on statewide issues, especially stuff like rural health, that sort of thing.
And now I've got to plug the AJC because we have the largest group of people covering the Capitol, and we also try to write for a statewide audience. That said, I mean, I think the diversity of publications and voices covering the Capitol is a good thing.
Hey guys, don't be shy. I'm going to bring up another topic as you all generate your questions. We have about 8 minutes left, but please put them in the chat and I will get them to our panel. While we wait for more questions to come in, let me ask you all about healthcare and housing. We know that healthcare was a very, very big issue, right? Going into the end of last year into this year, creating a shutdown over disagreements on how we would fund and create affordable healthcare. Some have suggested, hey, Georgia, you have all this money and surplus in the budget, could we use some of that to open hospitals? Could we use some of that to make healthcare more affordable? David, are you seeing anything that could potentially be going in that direction?
I think that in terms of using the surplus, Governor Kemp and the Republicans who control the General Assembly have been reluctant to spend essentially one-time money on ongoing services. Healthcare is a big expenditure. Between education and healthcare, I think it's what, 2/3 or more of the state budget. And there are federal cuts coming, which Ty and Maya can probably talk in greater detail about. A lot of that has been backloaded until after this year's election, but legislators are very aware that that's happening. And but I don't think that Governor Kemp in particular sees the surplus as a source of revenue for ongoing programs.
Ty, Maya, would you like to weigh in on the healthcare topic?
Yeah, yes, has been a big issue nationally. We've got Medicaid, although Georgia would be less affected by that because, the federal government is using Georgia's approach to Medicaid to apply it nationally. That's basically you have to work to get Medicaid, or what we call Medicaid, the state's program. So you have that issue. You have, and yeah, expanding Medicaid would cost a lot of money. So there's Medicaid. The other major issue is just private insurance. The Affordable Care Act, private market insurance. If your employer doesn't offer it, then you go onto the market and you buy it. And of course, as we all know, those prices are jumping quite a bit, maybe doubling for some, or maybe even more. So that. The impact of that remains to be seen. I think the reaction by the legislature will really depend on what kind of pressure we hear publicly about that issue. And I've been surprised because it's been, Democrats are definitely raising the issue, but it just doesn't seem to be getting the kind of traction one would imagine. Maybe it will, and maybe all of a sudden Republicans will start responding to it, but they haven't had to yet. So as far as healthcare, I mean, the sorts of initiatives they have are, like Kemp put $2.1 million in the budget for to expand residency programs for doctors. 'Cause the theory being that if a doctor, I guess there's some data behind this, if you you tend to stay where you do your residency because you have kids and they go to school. So then, you just put down roots. And so we're losing a lot of potential future doctors to other states because they do their residency somewhere else. So that's been the approach so far. And I haven't seen much beyond that.
I did also want to add that one thing I'll be watching is the impact of the Rural Health Transformation Fund. Georgia and every other state had applied for this, which was established under HR 1, which is also kind of called the One Big Beautiful Bill. And Georgia received, I think, most of the money that it asked for to, fund rural health projects. But it does kind of remain to be seen, where that money will go, how much it will help, because with people dropping off of, their health insurance, if you show up to a hospital in a rural area and you can't afford to pay, they are still required to treat you. It's just, it will be uncompensated care for those hospitals. And, the people in the rural health space that I've talked to say a lot of the hospitals operate with like 1 or 2 days worth of cash flow. So the margins really are razor thin. And so even if you have all these providers, if people aren't able to pay for their healthcare, that poses a big problem. So I
Yeah.
guess we'll see how that plays out.
That was like, I think, $219 million that we got, which was, like the seventh largest, but we're also a pretty large state. So I haven't done the numbers proportionately, but it's mostly to help modernize systems so that, hospitals can run more efficiently and potentially make more money off of the dwindling number of patients who can pay. So yeah, that's where that money's going. But yeah, we hear a lot about hospitals having, closing birthing centers, et cetera. That could be to finances, that could be to lack of doctors retiring, a lot of issues, especially in rural areas for sure.
Yeah. Hey, I think we have time for one more question from the chat here. It says, will we see intra-party fights in the legislature because of the elections?
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Yes, is the short answer.
Oh.
I think we'll see inter-party fights about a lot of different things, but elections for sure.
Even during a non-election year.
I was going to say any specific things that they might be, pinpointing.
Well, one of the tensions is between the folks who are running for governor, Republicans. Brad Raffensperger, as the Secretary of State, has been one of the chief defenders for the integrity of Georgia's elections. And Burt Jones, the lieutenant governor, has been one of the chief critics, saying that, the system is a mess and can't be trusted. And that will continue to play out, I think.
Yeah, we've during the I think it was the election committee, one of these committees, you had on the special investigations committee looking at Stacey Willis, other issues like that. Just not every Republican on the committee is running for the same office. So like lieutenant governor, so it'll be a challenge. This is in the Senate mostly, as they try to differentiate themselves from each other, even though they kind of all have the same general policies. So that we're going to be seeing that play out in nuanced ways. Like last year, there was just came out of nowhere an attempt to ban, I guess it was hemp related products, which now the federal government has done. But at the time, they were still legal, and you had just one Republican wanting to ban them and another, supporting the products. So, and that was, they were both running for the same office, so maybe that had something to do with it. That issue kind of just died down. But yeah, I imagine we'll see it bubbling up, especially like I said, on the Senate side. That's where you have a lot of people running for higher office.
It's certainly going to be a fascinating election, and we are now out of time. I want to thank our panel so much for coming on and discussing this incredible year session that we're seeing and going into the midterm. And Julia's back because, Julia, you do have an announcement for an incredible series that we're looking forward to.
We do. Well, first of all, thank you so much, Faith, for moderating today for us. Thank you, David, Ty, and Maya for our Reporters Roundtable. Really a great discussion. Again, reminder, this is being recorded, so we will get that up on our YouTube channel as soon as possible. And thank you again to the first panel, Sarah and the Georgia First Amendment Foundation. But yes, the Atlanta Press Club Louder Milk Young debate series will be back for a very robust 2026. We are fast at work getting together the debates that we will be producing, and please stay tuned to atlantapressclub.org for updates on that. But it will be a very busy 2026, not only under the Gold Dome, but around the state. So stay tuned. Again, thank you everyone today for your time. Stay warm out there. Enjoy possibly a little bit of a warmer day. And again, please go to atlantapressclub.org for additional information. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.